Yesterday we came to where Subhadra Paripajika, ascetic Paripajika, Subhadra, having got permission from Elder Ananda, went to the Buddha and sat in a proper place. And he said whatever he wanted to do to the Buddha. And in this sitting, taking a seat in a proper place, I want to elaborate on this point for your general knowledge. How one takes a proper seat, especially when one goes to a more important person or respectable person in Buddhist culture, in Buddha's sadhana, in Buddha's dispensation. When one goes to a place, especially to a place of higher rank or holy person or respectable person, one has got to understand what is the proper place to take, to sit when one goes to see that kind of person. Then only one will be wise. So in this regard, there are 6 proper places, 6 kinds of proper places. So we would like to touch on this subject. These places, 6 places, by which one is not making any offense, a blameless place, means that one must not be right in front of that person, respectable person. One should not be too far nor too near that person. One should not be on the, I might say, on the windward side of the person. That means on the side of the person where the wind is blowing from that place to the respectable person. And then one should not be seated in a higher place, nor too much in front, nor too much at the back. So these are the 6 kinds of places which we call proper place. If one is sitting far away from the person, the respectable person, then one has to talk aloud, speak aloud, and that respectable person also has to talk aloud, so it won't be proper. And if it's near also, from the point of human relations, it will not be suitable, it will not be proper. And if one is on the side, on the windward side, then one's smell and odor, body odor, might be blown towards the respectable person, and it wouldn't be proper. And if one is sitting on a higher place also, it will amount to disrespect. And if one is sitting right in front, then one will be facing the respectable person. Also, it will not be proper. And if one is sitting right at the back, then if every time the respectable person wants to talk, he or she will have to turn around, so it won't be proper. So these are the 6 kinds of places which we call proper places. Where Buddha was lying he was lying at a couch with his head towards the north, and towards the head there was a young sal tree, and towards the feet there was another young sal tree. He was standing on the right side. So he was facing west in this situation, and Subhadra was sitting towards the Buddha's feet, and facing in this way. So this is how one sits in a proper place. And in those days in India, according to the culture that was prevailing in India, all members of sadhana, monks, lay, men, women, and other people were able to choose such proper places. In accordance with this statement, as has been said in the literatures, as ekamanta nisidedua. That means becoming seated on a proper place. Then he gave this talk, or he entered into a conversation. That means, it goes without saying, that when Subhadra went to the Buddha and took his seat to talk to the Buddha, there was no mention about paying homage or bowing down to the Buddha in respect. As in other cases, as for other people who went to the Buddha for any occasion, for some business, for some reason, it is always said that Bhagavanta Abhivadetuva Ekamanta Nisidi. That means going to the Buddha, paying respect or bowing down, he or she took his seat. That is always mentioned, usually, whenever somebody went to the Buddha for some occasion. So in this case, there was no mention about bowing down to the Buddha. That shows that though ascetic Subhadra believed that the Buddha was able to clear his doubt, for which reason he went to the Buddha, but he did not possess any faith strong enough to bow down to the Buddha. Perhaps the reason why the ascetic Subhadra did not bow down in respect to the Buddha means that he was not holding any right views. He had non-believer in the Buddha. That's why he did not bow down to the Buddha. Perhaps he would have bowed down to other elder or higher paribhajakas, ascetics, who were his leaders. Perhaps he would have done that. But in the case of the Buddha, he did not do that. The reason is because of his non-belief, wrong view. Now, this is something to note. It's something to be for us to remember, because sometimes one's views, one's belief, one is believing in something, in some doctrine, without any pragmatic basis. When one goes to a respectable person, because that respectable person is of another denomination, that person would not pay any due respect. Instead, he behaved in a disrespectful manner. And such is the weakness of persons going to see higher respectable person of different denomination. Another thing to note or remember is the way he addressed the Buddha as Bo Gautama, hello, oh, well, Gautama, something like that, as if he was addressing to a person of the same level, not with respect, nor without disrespect. As a friend, on equal level, he was addressing as though the Buddha was on an equal level, instead of addressing as Bandi in respect, or Ayasma, and so forth. He did not even address the Buddha as Bandi. So, this amounted to disrespect to the Buddha, and he also addressed the Elder Ananda as O Ananda, or Bo Ananda, like that. And he addressed the Bo Gautama, and he mentioned this expression, Samana Brahmana. Samana Brahmana means so-called holy persons. In those days, people renounce the worldly life to become these holy persons called Samana Brahmana. You might call them nowadays holy people. There are so-called holy persons, religious leaders with many followers, and those persons are 6 in number. beginning with Purana Kasaba, who had religious groups, followers, much following, propagating or preaching their own views and doctrines to their followers. Of course, in this conversation that went between Subhadra and the Buddha, there was no mention of the names of these religious leaders, such as Purana Kasaba. But it is quite obvious that when he mentioned the holy men or religious leaders, he was referring to these people, these leaders. And as much as there are leaders in those days, nowadays also there are religious leaders. In those days, if one invented some sort of philosophy, doctrine, and preached that doctrine in a realistic manner, there were followers who would follow such people, would listen to them, accept them, and encourage such doctrines, such philosophies. As much as such things existed in those days, nowadays also there are such leaders, such groups of people who are believing the doctrines of such leaders and with blind faith. And in spite of the fact that they call themselves members of the Buddha Sasana or Buddhists, they are unconsciously or consciously, knowingly or unknowingly, accepting and encouraging these groups who are opposite, who are opposing the Buddha Sasana. This is a regrettable thing, and it is regrettable that such things still exist nowadays. So this expression is mentioned, Nata. That means these religious leaders and religious groups were very famous, and yes, as you know, much following, many followers. Also is given as Daitakara. That means they preach the doctrines which are like ferries to cross over the samsaric suffering. And they invented such doctrines, such philosophies, and they preached that. And this, the doctrines that they preach are compared to ferries or embarkation points from where one cross the samsaric suffering to the other shore. So this Daita is a ferry, given as ferry, because they serve as their like crossing point, embarkation point. And these Daitiyas, non-believers, those who follow such doctrines, such non-believers are known as Daitiyas. These people have existed long before the Buddha came into enlightenment. And they had much following, and they invented many doctrines. They had their own philosophies, which they preached and were followed by the students and their disciples. And in those cases, in most cases, in those days, prior to the enlightenment of the Buddha, those religious leaders would preach their doctrines, maintaining that, asserting that their views are correct views and no other. Other views are not correct. It's only their views which are correct. Other views are incorrect. Other views are useless, that sort of thing. In this way, they asserted such views. And even nowadays, also there are people who hold extreme views, extremists, maintaining that only their views are correct and not others. Others' views are incorrect. So the followers who are blind followers also would follow, would listen to them, accept them. And in some cases, they would go to the extent of risking their life, giving up their life for the sake of the leaders, for the sake of the doctrines. In the text is given this expression, Bahujanasa Sadhu Samada. That means these people were acknowledged by many as the virtuous. When you say virtuous, it is not ordinary virtuous. The kind of virtuous person who knows all, everything, omniscient. In short, they are considered as Buddhas. And they are by name, 6 of them, Purana Kasava, that's one, and Megali Gosala is another. Then another one who wore clothes made from hair, Ajita, called Ajita. Another one is Pagoda belonging to Kichayana clan or family. Another one is Sanjaya, son of Bilata, where the Sariputta, would-be Sariputta and would-be Moggallana had gone to pay respect or to follow. They are the old teacher, ex-teacher of Sariputta and Moggallana. And then the 6th one is Niganda, son of Nanda. So in this way we have 6 religious leaders by name. Then ascetic Subhadra continued to pose questions to the Buddha. Thus, Sabhite Sakaya Padinyaya. That means all these people, as they profess, that means they profess, they admit, all of them admit. Abhinyansu, do they know? Do they really know as they profess? Or do they not know as they profess? Or is it that some know and some don't know? That was the question posed to the Buddha by Subhadra. Because these leaders have so much given their doctrines by clouding the mind, so to speak, of the blind followers, that they knew everything. They knew the past, they knew the present, and they also knew what's going to happen in the future. So the question as to whether they really knew or they did not know as they professed, or is it that some of them knew and some of them did not know? So this is a very question which is a worthy question which could be given by the ascetic Subhadra to the Buddha. This is the question posed by Subhadra in order to clear his doubt, and such a question is a suitable question, a proper question which should be posed by anybody, because in the world, this is the nature of the world, that people who believe in some philosophies or doctrines or views handed down from the parents and ancestors, having a traditional faith without thinking, trying to reason out whether they are reasonable or not, whether they are right or not, and just following this traditional belief with blind faith. Such is the nature of the world. Even nowadays, with the development of science and technology, there have been many occasions which came up as news in the world that people follow blindly these views and were ready to jump into fire if the teacher or the leader asks you to do, or if you're asked to jump into the ocean or river, and die, drown yourself. They would do it blindly and listen blindly. And if the leader asks them to take poison, if you take poison, you go to the comet or something like that, you'll be reborn there, then they are prepared to take poison. And they did it. There have been occasions now and again in this world. So, as for Subhadra, it is quite reasonable that he asked such a question because he was a rational man. So, he said that all these 6 leaders, beginning with Brahmakasapa, professed that they knew everything, past, present and future. If they professed that they knew everything, they should be able to preach the Dhamma to lead the followers towards peace and happiness. But instead of doing that, they only preached their own doctrines, which are not reasonable. And also, these 6 people, leaders, were preaching different doctrines. They were not the same doctrines. If it's real doctrine leading to real peace and happiness, it must be the same doctrine, whoever gave that doctrine. Now, as for these 6 religious leaders, whatever they preached were different, and each preached different doctrines. That's why Subhadra asked whether these so-called religious leaders knew as they profess, all of them knew as they profess, or all of them did not know anything? Or is it that some knew and some did not know? It is quite natural that Subhadra had this doubt, and he wanted to clear his doubt. Because if one knows everything, omniscient, then one must be able to know the correct method or correct practice. And one doctrine should not be different from another doctrine as regards the principles of that doctrine. Now, the principles are different. Like the case of an arithmetical problem, arithmetical sum. Now, when a person is skilled in calculating the arithmetical problem or sum, he or she should be able to do it until he or she gets the correct answer. The procedure may be different, but the answer should be the same. Then only it can be correct. Now, it's not so. The answers are different from one another, from one leader to another. If it's the correct practice, as they profess, then if these doctrines among 6 people, if they try to compare, they should give the same result, even if the procedure may be different. But it is not so in this case. So as comparing to the arithmetical problem, both the working and the answer should be the same in every case. It is quite essential. Because if one is all-knowing, knows everything, omniscient, then the truth must be the same. They must coincide with one another. That is very important to note, to remember. Now, the Buddha has given the Dhamma, the teachings, has given the instructions, Majjhima Patipada, the middle way, by way of the practice of noble path of 8 constituents, or the practice of the 3 trainings of Sila Samadhi Panya, or the practice of the 4 noble truths. They should all be the same, and it should be so. If one is preaching otherwise, that one can accomplish one's purpose, that is the spiritual purpose, without the practice of the noble path of 8 constituents, without the practice of the 3 trainings of Sila Samadhi Panya, without the practice of 4 noble truths, then the Dhamma principle will not be the same. It is a wrong path, and it is necessary to know that this is wrong, and one should have a courage to say that this is wrong and discard it. Seems that when Sayadaw asked this question in this conversation, that these 6 leaders were not preaching the same doctrine, and they did not have the same doctrine in principle. So he had some doubts about it. Although he did not blame totally, that's why he asked very politely that with respect, due respect to these leaders, not without respect, but with due respect. He had some doubts whether these people, these leaders, knew as they professed or did not know as they professed, or is it that some knew and some did not know? So this kind of doubt happened in Sayadaw, and he mentioned this accordingly to the Buddha. And we can say that he's quite wise in saying this, because he's quite, his manner, his behavior can be said to be very polite. So how would the Buddha answer? Would the Buddha answer, oh, they are just giving blind doctrines? Would the Buddha answer like this? They're doing it blindly, and some knew, some did not know. All of them did not know anything. What would happen if the Buddha answered like this? Sayadaw says in his case, whenever he went on a Dhamma mission, to hoist the Dhamma flag, so to speak, to preach Satipatthana doctrine, he was very often asked by both people from within and without, in the West also. They would ask such questions like, oh, so and so teacher is teaching the practice or preaching the doctrine, and what do you think about it? What do you think about it? What is your opinion? So that sort of thing was usually asked by some people to the Buddha, to Sayadaw. And as for Sayadaw, he said that his reply was, we have come here just to preach in accordance with to preach the desana, that means Dhamma talk, exposition, the teachings in accordance with the instructions given by, guidance given by the late Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw, and to preach, to show the quality of Satipatthana Dhamma without criticizing other people. So by so saying, there was no more question or no more argument about this. Out of that, the Buddha answered with this expression in Pali, beginning with Alang Sayadaw. That means, Sayadaw, that's enough. Leave it. Let it be, that sort of thing. As much as to say that I'm not going to answer this question. This question about whether these religious leaders who were non-believers knew as they professed or did not know as they professed. Some knew, some did not know. All these things will be of no use. And the reason also is that the Buddha did not have enough energy to explain all these things to any length. And there was not enough time to do so. And it wouldn't be of any use to Sayadaw or anybody. And if the Buddha had answered that some knew or some did not know, or they all did not know anything, then it would amount to personal problems. It would affect the personal things. So those people who heard such comments also would not be able to bear it, and also it wouldn't be of any use to Sayadaw or anyone else. It can only amount to unwholesomeness, unskillfulness, and would be of no use to anybody. And for that reason, the Buddha said, Alam Subhadra, that's enough. I'm not as much as to say that I'm not going to answer the questions posed by you as regards the 6 leaders. So with this, we come to the conclusion of today's talk. We shall continue tomorrow how the Buddha laid down the principles of the Dhamma in 2 ways and spoke out lion's roar, spelled out lion's roar. That is the practice of this path. Is the practice of this path. Is the